This is what is known as the Russian Federation. Okay, now in Russia के एकदम नीचे you have Central Asia. Okay, so this is what is known as Central Asia. So let's say, for example, if I'm cutting out a block of Central Asia, I'm approaching Central Asia from the northern parts. Okay, this is Central Asia. Now, how do we understand Central Asia by a simplistic sense? You know for a fact that Central Asia are what you call 5 Central Asian republics, right? There are the 5 stans as they are called, and I'm going to give you a bit of a formula to remember this particular map, right? But what are the ways in which that you can remember this particular map to decide how whether you can talk about or what you can call signify as what is known as a Central Asian region, right? Take a look at this. If I have to identify Central Asian countries independently properly, let's do one thing. Let's take a kind of a x-axis like this, draw a horizontal line, right, in about what you can call 1/3 part of Central Asia, right? And this 1/3 part of Central Asia simply mark as the Kazakhstan. This is Kazakhstan. The largest country in Central Asia is Kazakhstan. Okay, and then the remaining of the part, which is 2/3, can very simply divide it in 2 by 2, 4 quarters. Remember one thing very simply: countries starting with T, the Central Asian countries, okay, countries which are starting with T are in the south. So what are the countries which are starting in T? Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, right? And then you can additionally get a sense like this: Turkmenistan is towards Turkey, which is the west. Turkmenistan is towards Turkey, which is the west, right? So you have over here Turkmenistan. Do you see what I'm trying to get over here in terms of achieving it? You have Central Asia can be divided in a very simple manner to get a sense of how this map has been categorized, right? A very simple and ordinary way of understanding Central Asia is to divide the Central Asian region into 5 areas. The first area over here is Kazakhstan. Okay, then the remaining parts of Central Asia can be divided into 4 quarters. You have Kazakhstan ke niche you can have Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. So the countries which in Central Asia which start with the alphabet T, they are towards the southern part of Central Asia. So you have Turkmenistan at the southern part of Central Asia, and you have Tajikistan at the central part of Central Asia. Okay, and then you already know that there's a little bit of a gap over here. If I can just identify it clearly, that the country, for example, known as Uzbekistan, has a kind of a protrusion that it borders with, let's say, uh, Afghanistan. Okay, so Turkmenistan over here, you have Tajikistan over here, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. Okay, this country over here, which has a little bit of a protrusion and borders with Afghanistan, is called Uzbekistan, and the country which is remaining, which is towards China, it is called Kyrgyzstan. Okay, so what I'm trying to indicate to you is how to, in a way, memorize the area of Central Asia very simply, right? These are 5 countries, and it is somewhat important for us to understand how these 5 countries are placed inside the Central Asian region. What I am suggesting is that you draw a kind of a rectangle and take 1/3 part in the north of that rectangle and mark it as Kazakhstan. Okay, and then you have 2/3 parts which are remaining. Within the 2/3 parts, you take the last two shelves in the bottom and mark them with T. Both of them start with the letter T. The one country which starts with the letter T and is towards Turkey is Turkmenistan. The other country is Tajikistan. Over you have Uzbekistan, which protrudes into the area over here, and here you have Kyrgyzstan. By this, you can very simply get a sense of how the Central Asian countries are delineated upon a map in terms of spreading these 5 areas with regard to each other. Class, do we understand this? Very simply. Should I do it again? Okay. This is Central Asia. Let's see. On the south of Central Asia, already understand there is Afghanistan, right? And on the south of Afghanistan, you already understand that there is Pakistan. Clear? Central Asia can be divided into these places. You have Kazakhstan. Then the ones which are starting with T are all in the bottom. The one with T towards Turkey is Turkmenistan. The one which is remaining in T is Tajikistan. You have Uzbekistan and you have Kyrgyzstan. So that's basically one way in which you can understand Central Asia. And just to be sure that Uzbekistan slightly opens up into the protruding itself into the southern regions. So that's how basically you can have a sense of what is Central Asia. So you can already see it in this map here. You have Tajikistan, you have Uzbekistan, and you have Turkmenistan, right? Uzbekistan just protruding into this region and having a border with Afghanistan, right? So just take a look at the map of Central Asia. Class, are you getting a sense of what I'm trying to communicate over here? Class, are we clear about it? Can you take a note of this? If you start from Afghanistan, this is where we were, okay? So if you do a little bit of a exercise over here, this is Afghanistan has a border with India, with China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Iran, right? Now, how do we take a look at Central Asia? Let's say 1/3 of Central Asia is Kazakhstan. This is how it stands over here, right? And the remainder of the area of Central Asia can be divided into Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Clear? Right? That's basically how we understand the connection of Central Asia, right? So that's basically where we move with regard to creating a sense of how this particular activity is going to work out for us. If you take, let's say for example, this is Jammu and Kashmir, okay, and then there is Pakistan, and then there is Afghanistan, and then there is the Central Asian Republic. Do you now understand the geographies which are working in this region? Do you now understand the nature of the geography and the ethnicities which are present in this region and how these borderings happen? Right? Now, just let me put a final nail to this entire activity. Okay, think about it like this. Russia has a bit of a understanding. Let's say for example, think about it like this. This is Russia. Within Russia, this part is what is known as St. Petersburg. Just extending the logic northward and covering the map areas very clearly. Okay, just if you take a look at the movement of this one, as we go from Central Asia, Kazakhstan northwards, this part of this area is known as St. Petersburg. Okay, this is St. Petersburg, and this region is known as Moscow. Clear? St. Petersburg and Moscow. Now, the way that Russia, for example, if I take a look at this, very simply, Russia's security architecture let's try to get a sense of what I'm trying to tell over here, is governed by two problems. You have Europe over here, right? You have the Europeans over here, and the Europeans have historically threatened Russia's sovereignty. Europeans can move into Russia directly over here precisely because of the fact that Russia in this region does not have any geographical frontiers against Europe. Okay, so if you take a look at, for example, this area in Russia, the Eastern European area, it does not provide any kind of a natural geographical frontier. In the, what you can say, the geographical activities of the Russians, in the geographical, what you can call, limitations of the Russians in European region, is the fact that while Russia is a distinct culture and identity and language and even a religion than Europe, Russia has constantly felt threatened by the movement of Europe. In one way or the other, European invasions have been one of the greatest apprehensions for Russia. The problem is compounded for Russia by the fact that there is no frontier, a mountain or a, what you can call, a river system or even a ocean which is standing in the middle of Russia and Europe. Okay, so Russia's security imagination has always been determined by the proximity that it has with Europe, and therefore the Russians have always wanted to create a kind of a security architecture by which Europeans stay away from the Russians in some way or the other. Okay, now if you take a look at, for example, in the 18th century, if you get a sense of this with regard to the 18th century, in the 18th century the Russians had to face Europeans on two ends. Europe was present over here till Pakistan, till the modern day Pakistan, till Durand line. This was Europe, and also Europe was present over here. Okay, so what the Russians have always thought in terms of their architecture, because British India is here, India, and kind of a combined invasion of Russia is what the Russia apprehends the most from Europe. So Russia basically has always created a bit of a security policy like this. It wants to extend its territory in these areas. Right, and the zone that it is going to supposed to create over here, right, this zone that Russians are looking forward to create in this region is a zone that Russia wants to create as a security zone for itself against a possible attack from the Europeans, right? So a part of this zone, a part of this plan is of course these areas which are known as the Eastern European countries. Okay, and these parts are what are known as the Central Asian areas. So Russia has always kept an eye on these areas to be able to produce for Russia a buffer zone. against a possible activity of the Europeans against the Russians. You see, what I mean to say is that Russia, Catherine the Great had said, the Empress of Russia had said, that there is only one way by which I can defend my territory, and that is by expanding them. Okay, so Catherine the Great had said that this one way only by which I can defend my territory, that is by expanding my territory. If I can take more and more territory under my control in the Eastern European region and the Central Asian region, that is the only way I can produce a proper security strategy, because the presence of no natural frontier leaves me vulnerable against the Europeans, which means I have to fight, and I don't even have a possibility of using geography to my advantage. So, a advantage which has not been given by geography has to be attained by foreign policy, and you have to take control of these regions for yourself. That's basically what the Russian policy always has been, and therefore the Russians have always kept an eye open for the Eastern European countries and the Central Asian areas, right? And that's basically what precisely we are going to take a look at. Now, I want you to just think about this as a very simple diagram. Okay, if you go like this, let's say if I create a perpendicular like this, let's say this part over here is a zone of interest for the Russians with regard to creating and completing their security puzzle against Europe, right? So, what are the areas that Russia have always felt that should be under their control, one way or the other? Okay, I'm going to mark them step by step. Okay, these are areas which are called, let's say, if you start from here, Eastern Europe. Okay, this is what is known as Scandinavia, right? And Scandinavia is basically these three areas: Norway, Finland, Sweden. Norway, Finland, and Sweden. These are the three areas which we are calling basically Scandinavia. Right? Okay. Now, the next part that is after Scandinavia over here is what is known as this part, which, let's say, for example, this area which is a water area which opens up like this and connects Russia to Germany is what is known as the Baltic Sea. Okay, and just underneath the Baltic Sea over here, you have what you can call a block of three Baltic countries. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. These are three what are called Baltic states. Okay, as you come down from the Baltics, you come into an area over here in Eastern Europe which is called Belarus. Please notice the identity between Belarus and Belarusia. In Hindi, Russia is called Rus. Sometimes Belarus is also called Belarusia. So the very clear ethnic identity between the Russians and the Belarusians, right? And then underneath Belarus is a huge landmass in the Eastern European region that is called Ukraine, a country in the Eastern European areas which is currently under attack from the Russians. This is what it is basically in Ukraine. And then at the end of this entire thing, there is what is known as Black Sea. Okay, and then from Black Sea, if you turn towards Asia like this, okay, you have three countries over here. One of them has a coastline with the Black Sea. These three countries are what are known as the Caucasus countries. Okay, these are known as the Caucasus nations. Caucasus nations are Estonia, Latvia, and sorry, I got. I'm sorry. Caucasus nations are Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Okay, and as you turn from the Caucasus nations over here, you have what is known as the Caspian Sea. And from the move to the Caspian Sea, right here, you have the Central Asian region, which we have already discussed previously. Now, please pay attention to this diagram slightly in a more detailed manner, because Russia-Ukraine war is an important aspect of our geography currently with regard to the problems that are happening between the Russians and the Ukrainians. So, just get a sense of what I'm trying to do over here. We are trying to create a perpendicular alongside Russia's border with Europe. Europe exists in western parts of Russian territories and also in southern parts of Russian territories. It used to exist in the 18th and 19th century with the British Indian Empire. Okay, so the Russians' security architecture was determined by a very simple idea that it wanted to make a perpendicular of influence covering Eastern European regions and Central Asian regions and bring this area into the Russian security orbit, to bring this area into the Russian security architecture. Now, from the perspective of understanding the geographical or the map based ideas about this activity, we are moving like this. We are moving this way, right? We are going from what you can call the northern parts to the Central Asian parts, Eastern European parts to the Central Asian parts. And what we are looking at in this context is what are the nations which are forming a part of this area. So, you have, for example, the Scandinavian countries, three of them which we are taking a look at: Norway, Finland, and Sweden. Then there are the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and they are separated by the Baltic Sea. Then there is Belarus, then there is Ukraine, then there is Black Sea, and underneath the Black Sea you have the Caucasus nations. These Caucasus nations are Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, right? As you move from Black Sea to the Caucasus, you are turning from Europe into Asia. Then you have the Caspian Sea, and then alongside the Caspian Sea, you have what are called the Central Asian republics, the CARs, right? This is the part that we are putting ourselves at this current point of time, as we have discussed Central Asian republics separately, right? So if you take a look at this diagram, and then this is a more complete diagram of what I intended to tell over here. This region becomes a area of what is known as Russian influence in Eastern European countries and Central Asian countries. Okay, and eventually this entire region, meaning all of these countries, come together. Later on, became part of what is known as the USSR. Right. So, if you, for example, ever have to get a sense of what are the countries which were a part of the USSR, it is these countries. These countries coming together are called the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So, when the Russians had control over these entire regions from 1917 till 1991, this entire region, along with the Russian Federation, right, this entire part was what was known as the USSR. Okay. right? It was the USSR which was formed by the leadership of Russia in terms of creating this entire zone of influence, and it was the USSR which collapsed in 1991, giving rise to the independence of the Central Asian republics, which became the five independent Central Asian countries, and the republics on the Eastern European side, which became independent from the Russian influence and became independent republics. One of them, of course, being Ukraine, which is currently under attack from Russia, right? So, just to give a kind of a reference to this point, if you move from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia upwards towards Russia, what I'm opening for you up is a map of Russia and the associated territories of Russia, so that you can get a very clear sense of how these countries are aligned against each other, aligned with each other in these kind of formats, right? I hope you understand the point I'm trying to make. Pakistan, you understand. Afghanistan, you understand. You take a look at Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and at the same sense, if you take a look at how the Russians were able to identify the Central Asian region as an important area for its influence to control these Central Asian regions against the formalization or like a possibility of an attack from the Europeans, right? This entire region fell under the influence of the Russians, and this entire region fell under the influence of the Russians. And this Eastern European region plus the Central Asian region came together to create what is known as the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, right? That's basically what we are taking a look at in understanding this point with regard to the map. Okay, so we see for here you have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Scandinavia, Belarus, Ukraine, Caucasus nations, which include Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and then you have the Caspian Sea, and then you have the Central Asian republics, which we have already given a bit of a determination, right? This is one map that we take a look at currently. Okay, I hope you get the point.